this a shot, a few bars just as a preview. And of course, if I offend, I apologize in advance, but it's a work in progress. So here we go. I've been to town beyond the boulevards and down the beach. I've learned some things that only time can teach.
Oh, that
And I also
bravissimo, bravissimo. That was beautiful, Jack.
I thought it sounded like
it brought the tear.
Yeah, and that truly sets the tone for old school shooters and as a theme song, because we've all been to town, we've all been there and done that. And I'm really excited about this guest. It's a lovely Sunday morning here in the Sunshine State. And I've got a 1 p.m. Tea time to hit the clubs. Was just talking to one of our old guests, Larry Zbyszko, the other day when I was out on the links. And Larry and I have much different golf games. You know, to compare it to wrestling, Larry is a great technician. He's a master. He hits his shots perfectly. He's got a great short game, which I'm working on developing myself. But I'm more of a power golfer. You know, I can hit some monster shots off the tee. I've honed those skills at the driving range, and I shot a legit 44 for 9 holes the other day. And getting close to becoming a scratch golfer. If I work on my short game, the shots to the green, my putting is solid, my drives are solid, I might be able to possibly beat the living legend, Mr. Zbyszko, out there in the Orlando area when we have our battle on the course. So yeah, life is good down here in the Sunshine State. It's going to be a lovely 80 degrees today. And I'm very excited about this guest. You know, I first bought my house in South Carolina in the Lake Murray area in 2007. And then I was moved to Texas and Austin. And that's when I was training with Kamal Shalarus, Prince of Persia, and roomed with him, UFC and WEC star we had on the show for those 2 years. I was only there for like 6 months, and then I got moved to Austin, and I rented out the house in South Carolina. And when I came back to South Carolina, or South Kakalaki, as I affectionately call it, I was there in the Midlands and moved back into my home there. And I started coaching for a gentleman named Jason Valek around 2009. And Jason Valek was coach of Newberry College. And Newberry College, although they're not a D1 school, they are a powerhouse wrestling school. Under the tutelage of Jason, they won national championships back-to-back in that time frame. And so I was coaching at Jason Valek's summer camp, his youth camp, at Newberry College, and I met a guy who's one of my best friends now named Steve Volponi. And I'll get to why that's important, because Steve was a fun young guy, loved to go out, hit the bars. We spent many good times at Platinum Plus, which was the dance club in Columbia. We spent some great times at Hooters. You know, those were some wild times, and Steve and I were partying together, and it all started coaching at Newberry. And then Jason had asked me to do with a couple of other guys he had a Kellyanne Dunson there, who was a beast wrestler, and we did a summer camp for grappling. And I was one of the coaches there, and I coached Steve, and I started becoming close friends with Steve, brought him with me to some grappling tournaments. He was very successful. He fought a couple times at MMA, and I cornered him, but just a great guy. And why do I bring that up? Why do I bring up the stink bomb, Steve Volponi? Because his roommate in college, when he wrestled at Anderson College, was the one and only Neal Koloff. And I want to start out the interview there, Neal. Take you back to your college days, Anderson College. I understand through Steve that your dad was a great coach as well. So talk a little bit about amateur wrestling at the high school and college level, and any thoughts you have on the stink bomb himself, Steve Valponi.
A lot of thoughts about the stink bomb, Valponi. Yeah, so like I grew up in the first grade wrestling. My father got a coaching job at Wade Hampton High School here in Greenville, and pretty much my dad, like he really didn't know a lot about the sport, but he learned out of a book essentially, and he used to watch pro wrestling back when he was growing up, and Mr. Wrestling Tim Woods would have on the TV shows what would they call amateur it was like amateur segment or amateur hour, something like that, where he would show like single legs and double legs, and this is how you do a duck under, it very basic wrestling, and that's how my dad learned how to do it. But as far as like the fancy moves and whatnot, like he really didn't know a lot about that. He just knew basics. And it wasn't until I started competing where I went to a lot of the wrestling camps, mainly at NC State. I went to a lot of clinics to learn like my craft. But when I went to NC State, where the first year I went, I'll never forget it, they had John Smith, two-time Olympic champion, six-time world champion. They had his brother, Pat, who the first ever four-time NCAA champion. They had Bobby Weaver, who was the 84 Olympic champion. And then it was leading into the 96 Olympics. I know I'm dating myself, but who cares? They had Kendall Cross, who actually just won the Olympic trials, and he was training to go into the Olympics that year. He had just stopped by just to get a workout in, but at the same time, they were like, hey, would you like to, be a clinician? And learning from those guys, especially Pat and John. Pat and John were just tremendous guys. That's where I really started to learn like my craft, where I became a two-time South Carolina state champion, and and then I qualified for the nationals that year. And then once I went to Anderson, that's where I had known about Steve coming up because he and his teammate, who I was also teammates with at Anderson, England Foster, both of them were state champions. Steve I believe was a two-timer as well.
He was, yeah. And I'll tell you, just to interject, I know England well. England used to train with us. And, England, in addition to being such a solid amateur wrestler, England was also a great karate guy and martial artist. Black belt in Kempo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and actually, it was funny because all of us used to get pissed at England because he was a guy who he reminded me a lot of Shelton Benjamin, who's a good friend of mine. He reminded me of him to where I remember Shelton telling me the story that they would go like overseas, or they would be on the bus to go to the gym, and Shelton would be, in the bus, working on his laptop. Boys are like, hey, Shelton, you going to come work out with us? He's like, nope. Just because like he didn't need to, he was that relaxed. And not only that, but like Shelton would be the first one to tell you, like, if he starts working out hard and heavy, he gets the size of Brock Lesnar, and he's just that genetically gifted. England was the same way. And it used to piss us off because there was a lot of times where, England was so relaxed when it came to wrestling that like there were certain days where he would give 100%, but then there were days where he was just like, all right, I'm just going to chill out today. I'm not even going to force it. And then they had a meet that weekend. Our assistant coach would get, upset with him. You can ask Steve the next time you talk to him about Coach DiTallo. And Coach DiTallo was from up in Jersey and just a flat out butthole. And he was just one of those guys to where if you didn't do it his way, oh, you're just, ugh. But yeah, they went to it was a tournament that weekend, a duels tournament, and England went undefeated that weekend with like that much practice, and which would always make us mad. But yeah, Valpone was he was a character. You know, they didn't know him that well in high school, but once I got to know him when we were in college, just a a guy that whenever you saw him, he put a smile on your face. He was one of those guys.
Absolutely. You know, it's funny. There's a guy that came out of Dutch Fork that was similar in that respect to England and Shelton was Tim Dudley, TJ.
Mm-hmm.
And there was one year, it was on Christmas break, and he was coming back from Nebraska, and he was in the room every day with Jordan Burroughs. He went within a couple points of defeating Dave Taylor at Midlands. So he was amazing. And I remember Steve's buddy Bill. He called a few of us and Mike Ellis, who was another really good wrestler from Dutch Fork, to have us go to Dutch Fork. And basically just one after another, we went at Tim, at TJ, and he was so good. And it just showed the difference between the high school level and then his high level collegiate, University of Nebraska. Tim was within a couple points of a national championship. So some great wrestlers that came out of Dutch Fork and out of the Midlands, you know.
Yeah,
but you know, it's interesting. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that, like, once Steve and I got out of college, we both got into coaching. And I remember I was coaching a lot of guys and leading them to the state finals. But Steve, I remember he would bring me over to talk to some of his guys, to where it would give his guys a different perspective. I would do the same thing with Steve with some of my guys. But I remember we were watching the state finals at Timmons Arena in Furman, at Furman University, and we're sitting there watching it, and Steve was just telling his guys, he goes, y'all don't know about good defensive wrestling. My shoot name's Jeff. And he goes, Jeff, am I right? Am I right? And I was like, defensive wrestling's where it's at, brother. You know, especially if you're a good defensive wrestler, like, you could possibly win a state title, maybe even a national title. Who knows? But Steve, like, I remember he was watching a match. We were both watching a match, and one of the guys hit a Russian, just a regular simple Russian tie, and the one guy got in the position where he wanted him to be, and you hear Valpone just go, "From Russia with love," and the second he said that, the guy got put on his back and got pinned in the state finals. So it was like defensive wrestling at its best. And that was one thing that Steve did very well. Like, even when he was in college, you never saw him shoot a whole lot. If he did, you knew he was going to score. But at the same time, like, whenever he was wrestling, he was an amazing defensive wrestler. Defensive wrestler.
Yeah, and you know, Steve, it's interesting when you look at him as a coach, but also as a wrestler, and that body style. The lankier, that taller body style. And there's another wrestler that knew through Steve. He's actually lives here in Florida, in Naples now, who was great at letting guys come in on him, shoot in on him, and he had a fantastic cross-face cradle, and he'd catch guys with it left and right. And that was that Dutch Fork wrestling. That was just such a great program for South Carolina. Such a solid program. But it's interesting because you talked about how guys like England, right, that don't really have to train. I mean, you and I know a guy like that. He was a UFC Hall of Famer who barely had any training camps. I think had one in his whole career. Was the Beast. You know, Dan Severn, he was always in shape, but never had a training camps. And I think he's lucid to this day. I think a lot of guys overtrain. When you look at freestyle, and you know, we're talking American folk style wrestling now and Egypt level, but when you look at freestyle and you look at the Russians and the success that they have had, and the way that the Russians do it, you kind of wonder, do the Americans overtrain?
Essentially, you would think they would, because I mean, look at a guy like Kurt Angle. His catchphrase, won Olympic gold medal with a broken freaking neck. But when you look at it, and this is something I learned while watching the 30 for 30 about Team Foxcatcher. And it's not just the movie. The movie's phenomenal. But when you watch the ESPN 30 for 30 special on it, I had no idea that the Russians were actually given salaries, given medical benefits, and they were like literally getting paid to train every day and getting paid to compete, almost like they were professional athletes. As to where the Americans, they had to go work a full-time job, and then when they came back, then they had to train. That's my son. If you hear him, he's got his fire truck out. So he's doing a cameo right now. There he is.
I'm gonna.
So, but he's those guys, they would literally do that, and so it was very hard on the Americans. So at that point, thank God for at that time, as bad as this is to say, thank God at the time for John DuPont, who he gave some of the guys opportunities.
Yeah, it's funny because you say that, and there's like a couple things. We had Kamal Chelarus on, and Iran is the same way, because wrestling is a national sport in Russia and Iran. But the Russian wrestlers don't overtrain. They train
don't.
differently. They drill, but they don't overtrain, and they don't overexert themselves. And another big difference in Russia is they don't do big weight cuts. It's a different mentality over there. But it's funny when you mentioned Foxcatcher. I used to do this stand-up show called Feast with the Beast with Dan, and it was a bar show we did at places like Flying Saucer, and we did it for the Carolina Wings. And he used to tell this story about when he was at Foxcatcher. The one day he was at Foxcatcher, and this is a funny story. It's tragic, but it's funny too. He got there, and he went in the sauna, and he's sitting in the sauna, and in comes Mark Schultz, and hand in hand with DuPont. And the way that Dan tells it, DuPont is wearing high heels, he has lipstick on, and he has fishnet stockings with his genitalia completely exposed. And Dan said he saw that. They sat down, and he said DuPont proceeded to play with Mark's hair. And Dan got up, he grabbed his bag, he went to his car, and he drove out of Pennsylvania as quickly as he could. And there was a lot of craziness going on. I had on my other show on King's Court, we had a gentleman who did a documentary on DuPont, and this was before he died. And this was real fascinating. He had, according to this gentleman, he had in his room, his bed, he called it the Eagle's Nest, and it was a bunk bed, and it was surrounded by bark and had a swinging door. And he would, and if you wanted to be one of his top wrestlers, you'd have to walk up to the top of the bunk bed and just imagine what might have gone on there. So it was creepy. I think that the movie really only scratched the surface of how bizarre things were there at Foxcatcher. And you're right about the money, because here you're talking about a multi-millionaire, billionaire family, right? So he had an endless supply of money to indulge himself with this. But when you really peel back the layers, it was really even creepier than the movie showed.
Oh, absolutely. And another thing was just knowing Dan, how you and I know him. I could see that, where he would see that, and he doesn't make really a lot of facial expressions, but I know he would just give it a look and just, I'm out of here, guys. Have a good one. God bless you all. We'll see you down the road. But yeah, like I agree with you on that. I don't think the movie did it justice. I think it was a great movie. Don't get me wrong, but I got a lot more information about it out of the 30 for 30 rather than the actual movie. But at the time, you hear a lot of the guys that were on the 30 for 30 talking about how, it was a blessing for them because, they're getting paid, $25,000, $30,000, sometimes $50,000, just depending on who it was. And they're competing. That's their job. They don't have to worry about bills
Sure.
because they were housed. They
Sure.
were
And
housed on the property. And it was just one of those things to where, you know, if I was competing for the Olympics, that would have been a dream come true to be able to, be paid to train, be paid to compete and win a world title. Absolutely.
yeah,
And
it's interesting, Jeff, because you say that and you think about, and not to get political, but we give these billions of dollars to countries like Ukraine, and we don't take care of our own athletes. We don't really take care of our own people here in the United States. I mean, that's a big pet peeve of mine. But yeah, I mean, I don't want to spend too much time on that subject because there's two people who've passed that you and I knew well, and I want to. The first one, obviously, Stefan Bonner. And you and I were on a card. I actually interfered at the end and hit you in the back with the ring bell.
that was you.
Yes.
I was wondering who did that. I was like, I'm gonna give them a receipt after this, but
I've got one coming from you, Neal, for sure. But so you had a great match there with Stefan, and just want to give you the floor and your memories of the great American Psycho, Stefan Bonner.
I'll tell you, it's him, Blippy. he loves Blippy. So, Stefan, when I first met him, it was funny. He was doing sparring sessions, and when he was doing the sparring sessions, he was saying he was going to knock me out and all this stuff. But then I just remember the funny part. He did one. It was I want to say it was like a senton or a swanton bomb off the top rope in Vegas, and he was saying, Jeff Lewis, Neal, that's what I can do. Da 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 da. And then I was just like, so you're practicing falling down for me? And he was like, he came back. He goes, I probably shouldn't have done that, should I? But I just remember going out there and being excited about the match, really looking forward to it because it's not every day you get to get in the ring with a guy who is legitimately a UFC Hall of Famer. I mean, I've been in the ring with guys like Scott Steiner, the great Khali, Vader. I've been in the ring with those guys. I've been in the ring with a lot of guys. But at the same time, like, it's not every day that you get to be in the pro wrestling ring and help guide a guy like Stefan Bonner. And that was just a true treat for me, in which we got to become very good friends. And I remember there was a spot in the match, and I'll never forget it. I told him, I said, just take me to the outside. We'll go up against the post. And he had the idea to kick the post. And I was just like, okay, great. And that way we could set up for something where I could take a backdrop onto the floor. And that way we could start our heat. Man, I'll tell you, if I had forgotten the spot, if I hadn't have moved, I probably wouldn't be sitting here talking to you right now. He kicked that pole so hard. He kicked the post so hard, it moved the ring. Like, it moved it. And when that happened, I literally saw the video because I heard him kick it. I was like, oh, that literally had to hurt his foot. No, he was fine. But it was just the fact that when he kicked it so hard, imagine taking one of those to the face by him in the UFC or at any fight.
Yeah, his kicks were so. I'll tell a funny story about his kicks, man. We were doing a stand-up comedy at a brewery in Charlotte together, and Bonner and I were both tipping him back. And every time that we tipped him back, it would turn into a drunken grappling exchange. And he would always, this was the funny thing about this one. I got him in like a, put my head, it's like we would call it Bulgarian headlock, put my head into his jaw, and I cuffed around, and I wouldn't let go. And the reason I wouldn't let go was because I knew as soon as I let go, he was going to kick me, because that's what he would do, you know. And so I let go, and he kicked me so hard, like a liver kick, even on the booze. And anybody who takes a liver shot knows your body just seizes up. And we're out there in the parking lot at this at this brewery. We had just done stand up, and people think we're goofing around. And I'm laying on the ground, and I can't move because he kicked me precisely within the liver. And you seize up. It's a good 20, 30 seconds. You can't get up and you can't move. He was so fun to hang around with. He was so awesome. And, you know, I shared 864 fighting championships on video where Bonner and I were commentating. We put the great Jeff Lewis Neal in the booth with us for a match or two, or a fight or two there. And those fights are actually going to be here on the Hannibal TV coming up. So we'll hear Jeff's commentary. But when you were there with your morning show host brethren from Rise Guys, and we were doing that, the Ring Girls and your buddies from Rise Guys, man, everybody that was a blast. I mean, Bonner knew how to entertain, and it was all real. You know, he's as real as it gets, man.
First time actually meeting him face to face was that moment.
Yeah, and he'd been on the Jack Daniels. We've been drinking Jack.
Yeah. And the funny part was, it was one of those things where I was going to accept the challenge, and we were just going to get face to face. That's all I was told. And I was like, sure, no problem. And boy, I'll tell you, I wasn't expecting a double leg and into the cage. And the funny part was, if you notice it, like he technically couldn't take me down. You know, it's like he drove me into the cage, but I'm like trying to sprawl out, trying to, you know, post his head. I'm trying to get a cross face in, because I mean the amateur wrestling instincts, they take over.
Of course, right,
yeah. And so once that happens, like I remember, here comes a fist, boom. You know, hits me, and I'm like, what the? I'm trying to get back on him, but I'll tell you, after that, like he came up and he thanked me. He thanked me for it. And I was like, you hit me in the head. And then he goes, yeah, is that okay? And I was like, well, it's obviously gone now, you know, but after that, like exactly. And it was one of those things where, you know, getting to know him just as a person, he would literally give you the shirt off his back if you needed it. And I actually spoke with him like a couple days before he died, and you know, just talking to him, seeing how he was, and just really, because I remember when he got injured, you know, from pro wrestling, and then had to go in the hospital, and he lost all that weight. You know, I felt so bad for him, and then after that, then the situation with his house, you know, when his house caught fire. You know, that broke my heart, especially just knowing that this guy, like he's doing everything he can, and that happened. You know, it was really sad. But then knowing what happened, knowing what happened after that, like it was just, I didn't realize that he had heart issues, and it broke my heart. It broke my heart.
Yeah, you know what, guys, I need to let everyone know that tomorrow I'm going to be at my law firm studio, Berman Law Group studio, where I host the Berman Team podcast. And I'm going to be doing the read for Chaotic Enlightenment, for the book that Stefan and I were writing together. And it's going to be produced as a TBT Berman Team production. And man, just so many great memories. We could talk all morning and afternoon about Stefan, but I want to talk about someone else that was very close to me that you knew that passed away, and from the upstate South Carolina. She was my best girl. She was my best promo girl. She could light up the room. And when we had the Clem's Gold, of course, in the upstate of South Carolina, it was the beer of Clemson, of the town. And she always did those promos with me. I got to meet her family. She was taking care of her mother. She was an angel. She was a sweetheart. And she was drop dead gorgeous, from Honduras. The lovely, the amazing, and sad to say, the late Stephanie Alanza.
Yeah, Stephanie, she was a great person. I remember every time, whenever you would text me, you would say, "Hey, I'm doing a showing here, or a tasting here at didn't matter where it was, but she would always be there with you." And I just remember, like, her personality would bring people over there to the table, and to where she would just say, "You should try this. You should try this." And she just had that personality about her, to where she could influence, a lot of people, to where, hey, give me your money.
Oh yeah,
One of those kind of people. But you're all right. She was a true sweetheart, and just a very good person. You could tell she wouldn't hurt anybody, and that it was sad to hear of her passing.
yeah, sad and awful circumstances, ugly circumstances. Don't want to get into, but she was a victim, and R.I.P. Stephanie. I always think of you, always remember you, and your memories are always come up on my social media from past years with our pictures together. And every time they do, I forward them over to the folks, because a lot of folks like Jeff that knew her, and we remember her. And I want to turn things over to my co-host, crooner, the great gentleman Jack Kilby.
Well, Neal, the Hannibal TV viewers are familiar with an interview you did with your partner in the Koloff dynasty, Alexander, and the Russian Nightmare himself, and got some feedback on that, where the fans were interested in the backstory as to how you got acquainted with Nikita and the concept for the team.
I had known Nikita for years, back when I was doing the radio personality under Jeff Lewis Neal, and like Matt had said, with my companions, the Rise guys, here in Greenville. Like I said, I had done many shows when Nikita, developed a very good relationship with him, and just got to just know him on a very cool personal level. And once I had talked to him, Nikita, if you know him real well, he dabbles in a lot of things, like a lot of ventures, pretty much like a self entrepreneur, and very smart, and just very calculated. So he doesn't get himself into anything unless he is 100% absolutely sure it's going to work, or it's going to be successful. And I remember Nikita had been talking to me. I remember there was a energy drink called Vima that he was involved in, and that's still to this day very successful. And he was involved in I want to say it was called World One, which was almost like another Fitbit kind of thing that he would wear. He would talk to me about that. Oh, your baby's in the bathroom, buddy. So once he would do that, he was talking to me. I want to say it was about Bitcoin. And while he was telling me about it on the phone, I'm looking on the TV, and it was talking about Donald Trump, Russian collusion. And I just, as he's talking to me, I sit there and I go, man, that would be a great gimmick for somebody to do that. And then next thing you know, as I'm on the phone, I'm like, I'm literally like looking at the phone, I was like, oh my God. And I finally said, Nick, I'm sorry, but I have to get off the phone. I have an idea. It's about you and it's about me. And give me a day and I'll call you tomorrow. And then he's like, okay, kind of weird, but no problem. And we hung up the phone. I had to gather my thoughts about it. And I pitched him the idea about, what if this happened, about me becoming a Koloff. And he liked the idea. And he said, if the opportunities are there, then we could do that. And so he felt it was best if we started it up as a tag team, and look throughout the world, look throughout everywhere, just to try and find who the right person would be, which is where I found Alexander, which was he went by Tyson Dean. And if you know anything about Tyson, he's an amazing professional wrestler, but also an accomplished Golden Gloves boxer in Georgia. I remember he was going for it was either the Georgia, and I don't mean to butcher it. If I am, I apologize if I am, but it was either the Golden Gloves in Georgia or it was the all Georgia team to compete like in the Nationals. And he got second. And it's not someone that you want to cross paths with, especially knowing he's an accomplished Golden Gloves boxer. So here you have me, as a two-time state wrestling champion and a national qualifier, and you have a Golden Gloves boxer out there. How do you think you're going to turn out? Like if you were to go into a bar fight, it ain't going to go well for you. But right now we're doing the singles thing. Alexander's doing very well on the singles circuit, and I'm getting ready to get back out there with the singles circuit as well. So it's been very successful for us.
And you had the opportunity to face, a who's who of tag teams. But one of the names that stood out to me in reviewing that was the Rock and Roll Express. Given the history, I'm an anomaly up here in that I'm a huge Jim Crockett Promotions fan from way back. I actually had a place in Myrtle Beach, so we didn't get it up here, but huge fan, and that rivalry with Uncle Ivan and Nikita, and then Crusher Khrushchev as well is storied. So how did that booking come about, and do you have any memories of it?
Oh, we've raced them several times, but I'll tell you one of the best memories we had. So the first time, Alexander and we had Nikita in our corner, and we were in Barnesville, Georgia, against Rock and Roll Express. Now, I have wrestled Ricky Morton in singles more times than I can even count. So knowing Ricky himself, it's like, the back of my hand, don't have to call much. And it's something that it was like, it was a gift. It's a true gift, and it's a true pleasure to be able to wrestle him. But I never had the opportunity to wrestle the Rock and Roll Express as a tag team. And when that opportunity came, myself and Alexander, we were both like kids, we were just like, this is great. We had special singlets made that were after the old school style, and which Alexander's wife, she makes amazing gear for Gear Gal. She does amazing stuff. She does ours. She does the Good Brothers. A lot of guys that are up there. Like she does a lot of awesome gear. But special gear made for that. And then Nikita's in our corner. Like, how much better can it get? Then we wrestled them, and I'll never forget this. We were in Rock Hill, South Carolina. And we had, I want to say it was a little over 700 people there. And we were the main event against Rock and Roll. But they had Baby Doll in their corner. Nikita couldn't come to this one. But the special guest referee was the great Tommy Young. And I was like, how much better can you get? And so having that match and just being able to wrestle them is just great memories. Great memories. I even told the both of them, I was like, I'm gonna take the double drop kick I'm gonna take a double drop kick and I'm gonna go to the outside. and they're just like, oh, come on now. Oh, come on. So, but wrestling those guys are just, it's just a lot of fun. You're going to have a lot of fun and you're just going to have a true blast. It's like a night off.
And you mentioned Gallows and Anderson, the Good Brothers, or I guess their WWE name is the OC now. You were involved in the Talk and Shop pay-per-view, which went, I guess, a couple of years ago now. How did that come about?
That was through Alexander. Him and Gallows are very good friends. And I remember Alexander called me and he had just said that, Gallows wants us to be a part of that. We were part, they did 2 pay-per-views, I remember, and we were part of both of them. And I just remember we went out there. It was funny. We were wrestling. I can't remember who we were wrestling on the first one, but they wanted an actual match. And the guys that we were facing, they were calling spots. They were calling spots for us, and we were just like, okay, no problem. But let's find out what they want, and let's give them a good show. And then Gallows comes and he goes, I just want you guys to go over strong. So literally, you guys are going over in 45 seconds. And we were like, okay, no problem. But I remember after that, they had D'Lo Brown come out, and he was going to give us the lowdown and give a couple of us the lowdown. Then you had Willie Mack coming out there. He was going to stun everybody. Then you had who else was it? Rhino. Rhino came out and gored a bunch of us. So it was a real good time. And then we did I remember Monday Night Raw was doing Raw Underground at the time, where it was like Shane was running. It was kind of like shoot fights. Well, Gallows has this old shed in his backyard that, like, it looks like it's breaking down. And it looks like it was there from, like, many, many moons ago. And so he had the idea to do Raw Undershed. And so and we were just having a great time with that. But it was a fun time for sure.
Do you foresee a resurgence in tag team pro wrestling on the national scale ever, or do you think it's kind of a concept that for many reasons doesn't work as well from a promoter's perspective as we talk about the golden age of tag team wrestling a lot on this channel, being my favorite genre amongst many other old school fans. But, aside from a handful of teams, such as yourself, there doesn't seem to be the amount of highly visible tag teams out there on the national stage anyway.
Yeah, it's there's so much you can do with tag team wrestling. Excuse me. So much you can do with it. There's so many angles you can go with it, and I think it's one of those where it's a lost art, where people really, they look at one specific person as the headliner. But what about a tag team that can be the headliners? And take the Good Brothers for example. They went to Impact, especially during the pandemic. Whenever all that happened, it was one of the biggest signings that Impact really had ever had, and they were helping build the company back up to where it was. I mean, sure, you saw like guys like Eddie Edwards, becoming the Impact World Champion. You saw Moose becoming the Impact World Champion, but you never really saw, the attention was really going to the Good Brothers because they were building the company, and it was tag team wrestling. So I think it's one of those things where a lot of people, especially from a promoter aspect, they look at it like, oh man, I got to pay 2 guys to come in. But at the same time, paying 2 guys to come in is actually more worth it than, paying one guy who's going to be even more expensive. So it's one of those things where I do believe it's a lost art, and there's so much you can do with it. So many storylines that you could do with it. So many angles that you can work with it. So it's awesome. It's an awesome concept to do.
Yeah, and with the current situation in Ukraine, etc., perhaps the time is right for another Russian invasion of the United States.
I 100% agree with you on that one.
Right on.
So,
Over to you,
so
King.
So guys, I want to close this out. We've got another guest coming on. I'm gonna need a little time to charge up my device here, but I want to close things out with an old school song. And we did the opener with the chairman of the board, the classic "I've Been to Town" with Jack Kilby. And for Neal, although he is obviously of Russian descent, he was born and raised in the American South and in the South Kakalaki. And we want to take you people on a ride right now.
Oh, man.
On a ride.
Oh, boy.
And you're gonna get to hear a duet from your king and Neal Koloff and Jeff's, and it sounds like a little harmony from Jeff's son in the back there.
Yeah. Lucas,
and we are about to hit it. Give me a countdown, a 3, 2, 1 there, Jack.
You're gonna hate me because I forgot the lyrics already.
If you're big star bound, let me warn you, it's a long, hard ride.
Right.
Okay,
that's right.
So Jack, you give me a little countdown here.
In 3, 2, 1.
If you're big star bound.
No, Jeff.
What
are you doing? Give the
know.
Countdown again. I'm going to be throwing it to you.
Well, you got to tell me the lines again.
We've got to get this. We got to get this song thing down for the old school shooters. You were singing the last line of the verse, Mr. Neal. Give me that countdown, Jack.
Shatoata. Okay.
Shatoata.
3, 2, 1.
I say, Drifter, can you make folks cry when you play and sing? Have you paid your dues? Can you mound the blues? Could you bend them guitar strings? I say, boy, can you make folks feel what they feel inside?
If you're big star bound, better hold on tight because it's a long way down or a long ride down, whatever it is. I can't remember.
Oh my goodness! Let me just say that I apologize to the great David Allen Coe for Jeff butchering it, and I'll just close it out. I'll just close it out with this: if you're big star bound, let me warn you, it's a long, hard ride.
There you go. Sweet mustache, by the way, Granahan.
Thank you, brother. Silver Sages, spreading knowledge to the younger ages. Thank you for tuning in. Old school shooters, baby. Oh!